I used to think homegrown blackberries just weren't all that sweet, but then I figured out a few things that made all the difference. If your blackberries aren't sweet, it might be the way you're growing them that's the problem. So in this video, I'm gonna walk you through the exact steps I took to grow sweeter, more flavorful blackberries. No sugar sprinkling required. One of the biggest things that affects blackberry sweetness is kind of obvious, but I'm gonna say it anyway, sunlight. So let me be really specific. So blackberry bushes, like many, I might even say most other fruit plants, need full sun. That means 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight every single day. So they are sun lovers. They really do need that to grow and fruit their best, but even more importantly, they need the sun to get the best flavor possible. And that's because of photosynthesis. If you remember your middle school science classes, that's exactly what photosynthesis is. It's the plant takes energy from the sun, converts it into carbohydrates. Carbohydrates include sugars, and that is going to help develop the best flavor possible in the fruit. So if your blackberry bushes aren't getting enough sun, that might be the reason that you're not getting the best flavor. One little caveat to that, speaking as someone who lives in Texas, our sun here is just stronger, and that's the same in other parts of the South. It's more intense, and that has a stronger effect on the plant. So you can get away with less sun if you live in a climate like mine, maybe 4 to 6 hours of direct sun a day. Mine probably do get 6 to 8 hours, and they handle the sun and the heat really well. The problem is the berries themselves can actually get sunburned. They get sun damaged. I'll show you an example of that. So just be really cautious of that. If you live in a climate like mine, you might want to put your bushes somewhere where they get a little bit of afternoon shade. Short of moving your blackberry bushes to another location, there are a couple things that you can do to help them get better sun exposure, which is going to help ripen the fruit better. So things like trellising, just to kind of spread out the branches to make sure there's even exposure throughout the whole plant. Also pruning is really important. Getting rid of excess growth. I have a couple videos about blackberry pruning that I'm going to link to help you out, but that can actually be a really helpful thing. Too much shade is definitely going to equal more tart or sour berries. But there's actually another really common mistake that you might not even realize you're making. If your blackberries are still sour and they're planted in a sunny location, the next place I would look is the soil. So it's a mistake not to check your soil. So specifically, I'm talking about soil pH. Blackberries like the soil to be a little bit acidic. So kind of within the range of about 5.5 to 6.5 on the pH scale. There actually is some evidence that even more acidic than that will make the berries sweeter, down to even 4.5. They can tolerate a fairly wide range of pH, but it does need to lean acidic. So if your soil has a lot of clay, if it's really alkaline, then you might struggle with fruiting and with fruit quality. So easy way to do that is to just check your soil pH. You can have a soil test done by a soil lab. There are some mail-away soil labs that I'll link to. But even if you just get a really inexpensive soil test kit at the hardware store like this one, that's going to give you just an idea of where your soil sits. If your soil needs to be more acidic, you can add sulfur to it, and if it needs to be a little bit less acidic, more alkaline, then you can add garden lime. But soil acidity is really important because different nutrients are available at different pH levels in the soil. So in order for the roots of the blackberry plant to take up the nutrients it needs to develop the fruit properly, it has to be within that ideal pH range for the plant. So this one's really important. The other thing that's really going to help is just the overall soil quality. How much organic material is in the soil? How much are you feeding the soil and providing the nutrients the plant needs? So the simplest way I found to do this, and the thing that made the biggest difference for my blackberry bushes, is to simply mulch with a layer of compost a couple times throughout the year, usually once in the spring and once in the fall. So that's going to add really great organic matter to the soil, lots of nutrients, happy microbes, all of the things that make the soil food web exactly what the plant needs. Fertilizing too can be really helpful. I typically feed my blackberry plants with a organic granular fertilizer in the spring, and I'll link to an article about that. But even more than that is the actual soil quality itself. So mulching with some good organic material is a really great way to improve the soil. Feeding and taking care of the soil is absolutely essential, but none of that is going to matter if you get this next one wrong. The next thing to pay attention to is, when are you picking? Are you picking too soon? So I just did a video about this that details all the ways that you can know a blackberry is perfectly ripe and ready to be picked. But the important thing is that if you pick too soon, then the sugars just aren't as developed. Even if the blackberry looks fully black and ripe, it might not quite be ready yet. And even another half a day might make the difference between a tart blackberry and a sweeter blackberry. I love this tip because it's really easy. There's no big change you have to make, just pick a little bit later. But really, if I had to boil it down to one thing that made a really big difference for the sweetness of my blackberries, it would be this. For me, the biggest difference in flavor came when I fixed my watering habits. So blackberries are great. They're pretty tolerant of fluctuating water. They'll even produce well if they're under a little bit of drought stress. But if they are drought stressed, if they haven't been watered consistently, you'll notice that the berries taste different. They'll be smaller, they'll be a little bit more concentrated, and definitely more tart or sour. So for me, because the summers here tend to be really hot and dry most of the time, for a while I didn't realize how much I was underwatering my berries during the hot season. So once I started more consistently watering as the fruit was developing, I noticed a huge difference in flavor, juiciness, and size of my blackberries. Now you have to be careful not to overcorrect, because the minute you water a little too often, or you might notice if you have a lot of rainfall, then the blackberry flavor can actually get a little bit watered down. So there is a point where it's diminishing returns. So a strategy you can use if you're getting a lot of rainfall, or if you suspect you might have overwatered, is to stop watering a day or two before you harvest any berries, and that'll help them to kind of stabilize and get that right level of moisture and sweetness. This is a little bit of a proof of concept. This has been still a very hot, sunny summer, but a rainier summer for where I live. And this is the best tasting crop of blackberries I've ever had. So what if you've done everything right and your blackberries are still on the tart side? Or what if sometimes, like me, you find yourself having to pick your berries a little bit early just to beat the birds? Are tart blackberries even worth saving? There's so many things that you can do with less than sweet blackberries. They still have value even if they don't taste the best on their own. So anything that you cook with, so jams, pies, all of those sorts of things, you're gonna be adding sugar anyway. So that's a great place to use those blackberries. But one of my favorite tips is to use it in a savory way, because often if you add salt to something that's tart or bitter, it balances it out a little bit. So for example, I've got a recipe for a blackberry barbecue sauce that I love, and I will link to. It's really great on grilled meats, and it's one of my favorite things to do when my blackberries aren't tasting as sweet as I know they can. There's one more thing I have to tell you before the end of this video. I didn't include it earlier because it feels a little bit like cheating, but we have to talk about the fact that some varieties of blackberry are just known to be sweeter than others. It feels unfair for me to tell you to pull out your blackberry bushes and plant a different variety, but I will include a link to an article I have all about the sweetest thornless blackberry varieties that you can grow. So that way, that's just something to consider. Really, any blackberry variety can be sweeter though, depending on how you care for the plant. So let me know in the comments if there are any tips that you know of that I haven't shared in this video, so that way we can all learn how to grow sweeter berries. It's not about luck, it's not even about having the perfect variety to grow, but it's about understanding what the plant needs in order to fruit its best. And once I did that, I personally noticed a huge difference in the consistency, flavor, and sweetness of my blackberries. And if you get it right, you'll grow berries so sweet you won't even miss dessert. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.